Yeah, so thanks for the introduction and the background, Amara, to BAG, which I've recently got involved in. So I run the zoology program at Liverpool University. That's what I've been doing on and off for 30 odd years now. And I've been involved in race equity EDI since the early 90s when I used to run black science boot camps in Liverpool. I think we were the first in the country, and we've resurrected those again, and they've had quite a remarkable impact on the intake of black students from our WP community in Liverpool. So today I'm going to talk about some of the work I do with regard to EDI. I'm just trying to get my screen to move on, and it has. And I think we've probably, as a sector, I think we've probably been a bit kind of negative, haven't we? About we've focused on the negative aspect of EDI. We've kind of we've taken an unproductive and punitive approach. We've tried to spot it in students' work. We've tried to stop them using it, so we've tried to ban it. And I think that's kind of where we were at a few years ago. And listening to conversations with colleagues, I still hear colleagues saying, have you seen the new version of ChatGPT-5? Have we can see what it can do now? How the hell are we going to stop our students doing it? So this attitude, so the Russell Group universities got together, they came up with a kind of collective positive way forward for us in terms of ChatGPT, Gen AIs. And a lot of focus was on kind of AI literacy. And we keep championing, and I think that's the first principle they came up with, AI literacy. And we keep championing this, but the rate of, I'm not actually quite sure what it means, if I'm honest. The rate of change of the technology, trying to stay ahead of the curve, trying to keep up with it's almost impossible. And it's down to teachers and academics to interpret and implement kind of fair use policies, and then for students to try and navigate these. So misinterpretation at their peril, so I'm still very uncomfortable with it. And I've done tons of reading across different, HEIs. We're all converging on similar guidance and stuff, but it's at the front line for academics and students where the problems, I think, are. And I think the more conversations, I've just chatted with Amara, she's been chatting with some MSc students this summer about how they use AI. We've been doing a lot more of this at the uni, asking about their fears, about the options, what they think it's leading to. So I think more of those conversations are certainly going to help. So I'm going to focus on AI and its kind of potential for reinvigorating EDI. I think we know that EDI has lost a lot of momentum, certainly before Trump got into power. So there's a lot of fatigue in that field. And I think we spent a lot of time, like decolonizing, we spent so long trying to define it. I don't think we've got anywhere near achieving it, and now we're moving on to something else. And so I think we need to kind of, get EDI people and kind of our AI technologists together to best inform how we approach these things. So I'm not going to focus so much on ways GAI can help level the playing field. I'm going to focus more on how I've worked with students with protected characteristics to do inclusive activities, like kind of co-create activities that'll feed into the curriculum by using AI. In terms of box 3, I'd much prefer to leave that as the kind of theme for the morning. Really, we need to be thinking about these conceptual issues, the ethical issues. So I'm not going to dwell on that too much. Okay, so I think in the very kind of high level, it's AI can be, what it spits out can be pretty inoffensive, but I'll show you a slide in a minute where it certainly is far from inoffensive. It's often unsurprising. It's improved my email grammar for the last 15 years. So in its simple form, it's actually quite useful. But we know there are tons of biases, and those two main biases come from the user and also from the kind of foundation models that are trained to as a basis a lot of the AI. So these large language models. And I'm going to use, I've just been on a field trip with students and I got back on Monday from 2 weeks in the south of France, and we were using an app called Merlin, which is people all got au fait with it during COVID, probably when we rediscovered nature and we found out that birds actually sing. And my students love to test my ability to identify bird songs in the field compared to the app. And 95% of the time, myself and Merlin agree. We identify the bird, we know where it is, and that's fine. The other 5%, most of the time I'm right and Merlin's wrong. And this is all to do with the language model. So the foundation model that Merlin was trained on, it was trained on a US, it's devised by Cornell University, it was made by them. It's being trained mainly on American birds. And then they've obviously done European birds, South American birds, Chinese birds, Mexicans, wherever it is. but the training is much less rigorous on those birds. So when Merlin listens to birds in the south of France and it hears a great tip mimicking other bird species, it then says it's that other bird species. I know that other bird species is very rare in that region, and I know it's a great tip mimicking it. I used the same app in Colorado this summer, went there doing some wild camping with my son, and it's much, much better at identifying birds that mimic. So mockingbirds mimic lots of other birds, but because it's had so much more training there, it's much less likely to guess and hallucinate, which is what AIs often do. So the basis of the language of the kind of large language models that these things use, is gargantuan things, have to be diversified to get the kind of output that we're looking for. And you can apply filters, you can say which part of the world you're in, but ultimately, it misses things. And if you combine with this user bias, so my students were wanting to see firecrest in the south of France, we saw one, but we saw a lot of gold crests. Merlin was suggesting firecrest, and the students were saying, "Oh, I think it's firecrest," and I was saying, "Well, no, it's not, because it's a gold crest." But it's the bias within the user also affects it. So many AI systems are designed for user satisfaction. They want to make you happy, so you have this agreeability, this confirmation bias, and that's just the way it is. So we need to be mindful of these things. All AI systems, particularly large language models, are sensitive to this kind of influence of user input. So how students type their search questions in or their phrases can lead the AI to generate responses that confirm kind of students' existing beliefs, even if those beliefs are actually inaccurate and biased. So there's evidence in the sector that this is leading to a lot of critical thinking. And certainly when I've chatted to some of my students about their uses and fears about AI, they see this as a problem, that they feel like there is this cognitive debt that they're losing, because becoming so reliant on AIs, they're losing this ability to kind of critically think. So we can accommodate this into some of our assessments. In terms of personalized learning, so I'll just move on a bit. I'm not going to cover all these in this slide, so don't worry about it. I'm just trying to scroll. I'm going to keep it quite simple. I've just read that Canvas is going to get a chatbot, so we can expect that this year. But it comes in many forms. Content recommendation systems, so on e-learning platforms. So these analyze students' previous interactions and recommend suitable content, so they create a learning journey for students. And other examples are adaptive learning platforms. They provide live adjustments in the difficulty of content, so they adjust the questions to make them not too hard, not too easy. And then there are many others, but then there are learning analytics. So we can see real time how our students are performing, and we can intervene and make changes. So these things are all pretty well used in the sector, so I'm not going to focus on them too much. But there are certainly inequalities in terms of access, and that's not just the hardware and the software, but in lots of different ways. Currently, to my knowledge, there are no downloadable ChatGPTs for standalone on most wearables. So on glasses and watches, I don't think there's a downloadable version. But on those apps, there are certainly so on those wearables, there are certainly third-party apps that allow you to access OpenAI's, the API, the application program interface. So you can send queries to clouds. They will send results back to your wristwatch. And OpenAI have said that they're going to. There's a whole load of these things going to be on the market in 2026. So how we deal with that, these are the kind of things that certainly keep my educational developers at the uni awake at night. How are we going to police these things in exams? Having essentially, laptops on computers that are linked to these things. So these things cost hundreds to over £1,000. So there's going to be an economic issue there for students who can't access them. And even if we provide kind of free AIs for our students, there are other ethical issues around hardware and infrastructure. So there's been a few publications by HEPI and UCAS, and JISC has just published one, I think 2023, and they found that over a quarter of students had no suitable devices, over half struggled with Wi-Fi connections, and about a third worried about mobile costs. So these are all inequalities in access. I won't talk about getting into bed with your EDI colleagues or your AI colleagues just yet. We can chat about that later. This is something students raised to me in a focus group we had, and they worry about things like sustainability. ChatGPT uses 30 times more carbon than a regular search engine. They've just published their figures for Gemini, Google's Gemini, and they were saying they're massively much more efficient now, but efficiency will also increase their usage, and that way they're going to use more energy. So even though Google is very dependent on, on kind of sustainable, renewable energies, they're actually looking at nuclear now to supplement what they do. So, okay, I'll just skip about the prospect of artificial general intelligence. It doesn't exist yet, but it's probably not far off, and that's where computers can think and rationalize like us, but we're not going to do with that. So I said that it's largely inoffensive. I sent an email to colleagues last week asking them for any howlers that they spotted in student assignments. And there's quite a nice one here about Homo floresiensis, so that, the kind of the dwarf version of us, if you like. And they'd put this into a conclusion. It mentions about hobbit people. It mentions about dwarfism, kingdoms or something, and about collecting gold in these places. And this is a student has submitted this as part of their essay on human evolution. This is and these are all examples of it. This is a search that an infection microbiology colleague did to look at. I basically asked ChatGPT to develop a life cycle of a parasite with part of its life cycle in sheep and part of it in snails, and this is what it spat out. So you've actually got hybridized sheep snail in the bottom of this thing. So it isn't always inoffensive, and these are the hallucinations that it's prone to that we need to know when we're working at the coalface with it. I'll move on. Okay, so I normally, when I meet a group for this, I normally do one of these things. It's a positionality statement. I recognize I'm part of the problem. And part of the problem we're talking about today, this inequalities in our non-inclusive practice and how we make students feel, valued in our universities. These things are popping up left, right, and centre, aren't they? So, I have lots of privilege. I'm white, I'm a male, I'm able-bodied, I'm a professor. So I recognize that a lot of the views I express in this talk might not align with yours. And this isn't, that's only because of my lived experience. I haven't got a shared lived experience with you. And therefore, if I get things wrong, then it's not deliberate or willful. Not only am I a problem, but we as scientists are a problem. So are these pop-ups, and there are lots of us. So Carl Linnaeus. In science we tend to hero worship. I certainly hero worship Carl Linnaeus, the phenomenal botanist who came up with binomial nomenclature. He was the first kind of scientist to really talk about human varieties. He didn't talk about us as subspecies. He didn't use the term race. He talked about varieties, and these were based on the 4 kind of geographical corners of the planet. And then he went on to change it slightly, made it based on humans, and then it became a bit, dark after that. To be fair, but I'm not going to go into it. Johann Blumenbach was a German physicist. He's regarded as the kind of founder of racial classifications. And they talked about this reversible degenerative hypothesis. If you took black people and put them into white environments, they would reverse to the white form. So these really unhealthy views. Morton, so Samuel Morton was an American physician. He didn't believe in a single origin for humans, like the Bible and science at that time. That he was a polygenesis. So he talked about there being multiple origins for humans, and that's why blacks and whites were so different, and we could treat them differently. And Agassiz, so Jean Agassiz produced these beautiful daguerreotypes. So this is one of the first uses of cameras, these very fancy cameras. And this guy's Jack, he's an enslaved person. And this catalog was used to show the anatomical difference between black and white people. Fish is also on that slide. I won't talk about them just now, but before, everyone beats Fisher with the kind of raised stick. Fisher was very cognizant of what he was doing and what he was saying at the time. So I would really recommend people read a lot more about Fisher. Ultimately, though, scientists came up with these pseudoscientific terms like tame-ableness, where black people were very easy to be enslaved and be put into servitude, and they actually enjoyed it. And this drapetomania, which was those black enslaved people who tried to escape must have been mentally ill, because slavery was so good for them. Why would you want to do that? It's because you're mentally ill. So they devised this other pseudo scientific myth called drapetomania. AIs perpetuate these problems. AIs perpetuate racism. There's been quite a big study by language scientists on looking at OpenAI's ChatGPT and Google's Gemini, and when you feed job applications into them or potential criminal profiles, these things produce racial stereotypes based on African American vernacular English. So they'll look through these job applications or potential people who may potentially go to prison for whatever, fictitious crimes in some cases, and they will search those people's socials and stuff. And if they use these Black American vernacular terms, then they're much more likely to be given the less prestigious jobs, they're much more likely to be convicted and even sentenced to death. And this is purely done by these algorithms, these language algorithms, using this racial bias that's being programmed into them. Okay, so back to me. The things that probably I regard myself as less of a problem in the sense that I'm quite an activist. When I was a young person, I was a hunt saboteur. I used to go and disrupt Prince Charles's fox hunts in Corn and Derbyshire and in Cheshire, go and disrupt fox hunts. I'm also a Scouser, and that is quite an interesting thing. I mean, even Nike got onto this whole thing about, they understood Liverpool's relationship with the rest of England. People talk about people in Liverpool talk about Liverpool as a kind of the People's Republic of Liverpool, and this is, and you'll hear that Scousers always boo the national anthem, and that upsets the media, upsets the opposition fans, and it particularly upsets the BBC. And we don't like the BBC. We don't trust the BBC. And this is all to do with this history of these songs that fans still come to Liverpool. Harry Enfield's responsible for loads of money characters. The awful Scouse terror stereotypes. With what were they called? Those, I can't remember. The moustaches. The three Scousers. They were too thick to disagree without fight. And these kind of stereotypes are so unfunny, and they have a legacy. And even the term Scouse was given to Liverpool by the rest of the country during the potato famine, when people came to Liverpool during starvation. The poor people of Liverpool were feeding what scraps they had left, mainly potato water. And that's program. The longest, most in judicial history. People still choose not to believe the findings, not to choose to believe that the police were not at fault. They choose to believe that the government not at fault, and the FA, even though the police were found guilty of it, they were acquitted, etc., etc. So, in my opinion, keep booing. If you do see anything you want to use during this talk, I'm sorry if I'm teaching you to suck eggs, but if you do see anything that's useful, please do take it. And do as this Saturn Bowerbear's done, and just take ideas. It's fine with me. So this is an overview of more or less everything I've been doing for the last few years. I'm only going to talk about a handful of these things. I've focused largely on changing the curriculum. It's nice to hear Amara talk about changing the physical learning environment, because we underestimate the importance of the infrastructure of our buildings on how students feel that sense of habitus. And I've also done a lot of work of re-engaging with the Liverpool Black community, because they've completely lost trust in us. So probably the first thing I did, so that is set up a student group. So I set up a group called the Decol SOBS Advocates. So that was Decolonising School of Bioscience Advocates. And this was a staff student group where we chatted about possible ways of, changing our curriculum, changing the physical spaces. I use it for recruiting students now and managing projects. I'm running 3 projects at the moment, and I use it to collect evidence and impact, and then I can feed that higher up the food chain to those with the cash who can make a difference. And what was interesting about this group is the Black students in this group and the white students said it was the first time they'd discussed racism at our university. And here they are. There's a sample of them. There's been about 25 students in this group. Every single protected characteristic is on that slide, apart from, I think, pregnancy. No, I'm sure they didn't tell me if they were, because they're all scientists, so they shouldn't be in the lab. And this group, everything I do with this group. What's critical about this group is you have to protect them. So you have to protect them from the kind of emotional burden of doing the work. you have to ensure that you pay them. I don't let students do any of this work for free, even though they offer all the time because they feel it's so important and needs to be done. I make sure that we prepare them properly, so we train them in whatever it is, whether it's coding, whether it's public speaking, whatever it is, we make sure they're trained. The skills we give them and the projects involved, then we purposely link to employment. And whatever they do are put into practice real time, so they can see what they're doing is having an impact. I put this slide up because quite recently I went to a very prestigious Russell Group university. I did a talk about racism in HE and what we can do to redress it. And a black medical student came up to me at the end and said she identifies lots of issues in my talk that she sees in her institution, but is too scared to come to the senior people and tell them about it. And she said she doesn't want to be the nail that sticks out. So I think we can't underestimate that she said she just wanted to focus on her study and didn't want to have to be part of the fight. So I think the point I'm making is that allyship in whatever form is really, and advocacy is really important in pushing this way forward. Okay, so I think this is one of the first things we all did. We probably low-hanging fruit. Let's make some reading lists. I've put pricing on here so you can see how much it costs, number of students involved, and people I like to give credit to. So we used, I think I probably, so these resources are now available on our university campus page within the school. So there's a little EDI folder, and there's all the different reading lists there. I'll come on to those EDI-ographies in a minute. We used R to do searches of stuff like Google Scholar, Web of Science. We also got library staff, Shirley, to train the students and use some proper Boolean terms. And we also used AI to generate alternative keyword searches, translate non-English articles, make suggestions on setting the kind of how we present the reading list, and also to do extra reading. And this is just an example of what an anatomy paper. So if you go into any of these links here, you'll see a whole list of papers. So we've got about 160 of those. They're now out of date. That's an issue with doing this work. It's now just sit there frozen. I need more money. They're not going to give me it. They only give it seed funding for these things, and then you've got to go and get somewhere else. Yeah, I know you should. I'm sure you know the story. This is another thing that was on that particular resource page. These are EDI-ographies. So these are either short PowerPoints or short videos that students have created about people who they feel in science have been marginalized, whether female or black or disabled, whatever it is the student particularly wants to raise the profile of. So this one's you'll know about these Okazaki fragments. Her husband and her discovered these together. He died. They were about to get a Nobel Prize. When he died, she didn't get the Nobel Prize. And it's just a classic example. Barbara McClintock. There are lots of these people in our field that we'll know about. So this is what they kind of look like. So this is a collective group of these things on our intranet. So staff and students can drop into these and they get either a video or a PowerPoint. So we use AI to search for different authors. We've used it to translate content, and we've even used it to generate little videos. So there's lots of free AI software now for just type in, create a video about Alice Ball or something like that, and then you'll get a little video. I'm about to show you an example of one of these created by a student. Please shout if you don't hear the audio.
You know that loud sound in your chest? You know, that kind of speeds up when you're scared or even when you're excited? Yeah, we didn't always know how it worked. And one of the first dudes to get it completely wrong is this guy right here called Galen. He believed that whenever we eat anything, that the food in our gut underwent some type of concoction, and it was transported to the liver where the blood was formed and imbued with something that he was calling natural spirit. He now thought that the blood then flowed to the right ventricle, where some entered the lungs via the pulmonary artery, which nourished the blood, and the remainder of the blood reached the left ventricle through something called invisible spores. All through history during that time, people were trying to get their minds around what are these invisible spores, and do they actually exist, moving blood from one side to the other. Well, that was Galen's theory. And 555 miles away, in 1213, a man was born who questioned this theory, and whose work is still relevant today in how we understand the heart. During the time of Ibn al-Nafis, Galen's teachings were very, very prominent. But Ibn al-Nafis had a big major problem with them because he just didn't think some parts of it were really true. Now just imagine how hard this was. Imagine everybody in your class right now think something is true, but you know that it is wrong, and you have to somehow come up and say that, oh, this is actually how it's meant to go. That's what Ibn al-Nafis had to do with the whole school of Avicenna. Because Galen had this idea, like I mentioned earlier, about the invisible holes between the two different sides of the heart. Ibn al-Nafis thought this was not possible because the heart is a solid structure. It is thick. There's no way that there are holes in between the different halves of the heart. So, what was his resolution? How was blood flowing between these two different halves? It was simple. These three main things: the pulmonary artery, pulmonary veins, and pulmonary capillaries. He felt that it's only through these three ways that the two different halves of the heart were able to have any connections and to communicate between each other to pump blood effectively to keep the body moving. A lot of people thought he was crazy, but 300 years later, Europeans agreed with him because it was the only way that they thought it made sense on how the heart was able to pump blood. Thanks to the teachings from Ibn al-Nafis and other healthcare professionals over the years, we are in a better position to understand and treat life-threatening cardiovascular conditions. The work is far from finished. As we continue to progress in the future, and I'm sure many more contributions are going to be made, let us not forget pioneers like Ibn al-Nafis and many others who sacrificed their time and their efforts to help us to get to where we are right now, with one common goal: to help to prolong human life.
So that's an example of an EDIography. I'll just move on to this. So this is an app we've developed. So basically, academics really weren't using the reading list, so we developed this app to try and encourage them to do that. And this is using, so basically it's using R, so we can chuck our module reading lists into this very simple app developed in R, and it'll spit out a map. So this was a map of publications about cephalopods in Africa or China and stuff. So it's it just shows how biased your reading lists are. So obviously we shouldn't be using AI particularly to generate code fixes because we want our students to learn how to program. But it's also very useful for predicting gender identity of authors. So there's different AIs. So Gender Eyes and Gender API can identify reasonably accurately people's ethnicity based on the names. There are also AIs that can identify ethnicities based on facial features, but they're less effective. So I wouldn't suggest using those. But it's certainly discriminatory against trans and non-binary authors for obvious reasons. And students can do the legwork to find out those things from their socials. So this is now available in our UDP. Students are using it, staff are using it on module reading list to see how kind of kind of which we have to break inclusivity, or this. I want to talk about that. We've got that. This is it. I think I started slightly late, Nick, or James, so just give us a shout. But we're now currently doing an audit of our medicines case-based learning with our first year. So with a series of medics, we've got about 5 medics and 5 undergrad students, and we've done a longhand search looking through the so the issues, like as an obesity or when patients present and surgery and stuff. And students looking at the obesity, whether the use is stereotypical, whether black people included, whether the disease is relevant to black people and not just in general. We're trying to with these, more anti-racist, if you like. We're all using the semantic search app, so this uses EDI, but it works on a kind of local network. So whatever you do doesn't go out into the into the universe, if you like, and it depersonalizes any of the content, and students can search all our internal campuses and Panopto recordings, and there's even a chatbot feature within it, so they can ask questions. So provide examples of when ethnicity is mentioned in CPS, for example, in this case, but we're doing this also at a kind of a program level as well. What we got? This is probably the final thing I'll end on. So I've used just for a bit of inclusivity in terms of representation, I've got a series of students from the Decol Soils Advocates to create these basically skills videos within practicals.
I just finished studying biological sciences at the University of Liverpool. I'm autistic and I use headphones and take regular breaks to cope with sensory issues in labs. I also identify as queer and use she/they pronouns. And today I'm going to show you how to use the microscope, including how to do an oil immersion. The first step is to turn the microscope on, ensuring to turning it on at the bottom too. Around this side there's a little wheel which you can use to adjust the light. The first step is to move the stage down all the way to the bottom by using the coarse focusing ring. Now you can open this clip, put your slide in, make sure it sits well in that corner, and let it go to secure it. You want to ensure that the light is coming through the slide and that you can see the slide on the microscope. So by looking through the microscope and using these two little wheels on the right, you can adjust how the slide sits over the light, horizontally and vertically. The next step is to select the appropriate objective lens. You can do this by turning the turret, that's how you rotate the objective lens, and you want to use the lowest magnification, which is this red one here. Okay, on the right hand side of the stage you'll find a little metal lever. You can use this to ensure that the light is coming through the iris by fully closing it and then opening it slightly, and you should feel a click. The next step is to look through the microscope and raise the stage by using the coarse magnification, and you should see the image come into focus. If you are still struggling to see your specimen under the microscope, you may need to adjust the position of the slide by once again using the horizontal and vertical stage movements. Now our specimen is in focus on the lowest magnification. We want to move the turret so that it is on the next magnification. By using the fine focusing wheel on the right hand side of the microscope, and by looking through the microscope, we can bring into focus our specimen on this magnification. Once again, you may need to bring the specimen in focus to get a better picture of what you're looking at by using the stage movements. And then you proceed to the next higher magnification, doing the same by using the fine focusing wheel. You should now see a clear image of your specimen under the microscope. We don't use the coarse magnification at this point in the process as to not scratch the slide against the lens of the microscope. Congratulations! You now know how to use a microscope. Now, if you want to see your specimen at a higher magnification than the microscope can do, you can use an oil immersion, which allows us to see at an increased magnification. As following the previous video, you want to put the objective lenses so that they are in between, about to go to the 100 times objective lens. And you want to open the oil and put a dab of it directly onto the side. It is slow moving, so it might take a little bit of time to come out. And once again, by moving the turret onto the next objective lens, we can connect the oil to the lens so that the slide and the lens are connected by this oil. And that is how you set up your oil immersion. And you want to look through the microscope and you can adjust using the fine focusing once again.
Just give me a shout if you want me to stop, but I just want to show this final study. So I'm doing a study on the Warden gap. We're just following a series of students from first year through to fourth year, hopefully. I've asked them about here. The program offered, interestingly, the city and evidence of diversity within curriculum learning environments was the third reason why they chose us, which is lovely to see. It's great. However, I then asked them about all the initiatives that I've been involved in and whether they're aware of them. And it's great to see they know about the boot camps, about the mentor scheme, all these lovely schemes that I've set up with students and colleagues to run. And yet the final question is, do you feel that the curriculum adequately represents your diverse perspectives, contributions? We still haven't cracked that nut. So this has been about 4 years working out, and students, I'd love to have seen that figure 4 years ago, to be fair, but That's this is the people that I've acknowledged. That's my son. He's doesn't a bird, and someone can tell you what species I think it is. And last cat is that's little. I am over time. I'm very sorry. I'll stop sharing.